is interested in knowing what we have upcoming, you can check out the website for all of the future Lunch and Learns. And I will hand over to our speaker today, Fraser, who is joining us to help us learn a little bit more about leadership development within data and analytics. Thank you, Fraser, for joining us.
Well, no, thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone for coming. I'll say some more as I get going into the session. I would just really love it if people would put cameras on, if that's okay. I'm going to try to get bits of reaction and bits of conversation going. I'm not going to lecture. You'll be delighted to know on this hot Tuesday. I'm not going to lecture for 45 minutes. I really do need to get a conversation with you if that's possible. And I find that excruciating if it's just initials on screens. And I can't be alone in that. So if you'd be kind enough to put your cameras on, that would really help me. Thank you. So I'm the head of policy at the strategy unit, which means my job is to take the work that colleagues, particularly analytical colleagues at the unit, do and translate it through into policy messages. So I'm unusual in the sense of not being an analyst in a team that is an analytical team. You know, those of you that know the unit know it for its analytical work. But I've been sort of fairly well involved in developing our work on helping analysts think about what leadership might be for them and think about what a leadership development trajectory might be within the analytical profession, and have been part of the team that has run a program that we designed specifically called Leadership for Analysts for several analysts and several teams over many cohorts. And some of what I'm going to present to you today draws from those programs that we've put together. I'll start showing my slides so that you can see what I'm going to cover with you. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. Are we? There we go. So the way I'm going to run the session, I'm going to rely really very heavily on engagement and participation from you. And I remember going on a leadership program, about a zillion years ago, and at the outset they said something like, all of the answers that you need for this program and for your journey of leadership are actually in the room. And when I heard them say that, I can almost remember my heart sinking and thinking, no, come on, I've not paid to be here on a leadership program for you to tell me that I have the answers and the people around me have the answers. But sort of, 3 or 4 life-changing days later, I realized that actually was true. So I am going to sing for my supper. I definitely am. You're going to get some input from me, but I really do need a good chunk of participation from you. And the first thing that I'd like your reflections on, please, and we probably best if we do this by people putting their hands up and offering contributions. Oh, sorry. Here I'm distracted. The first thing I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. First of all, we're going to talk a little bit about sources of power and influence for analysts. Secondly, I'll give you some pointers in relation to telling the story of analysis, which was something that several of you said you wanted. And then finally, I'm going to end with this question of analysts actually being the story, and what it means to be an analytical leader when you're attempting to set an agenda or do something publicly. So first of all, this question of generally of sources of power and influence for analysts. And my question for you is this: is can you help me out? Can you help everyone on this call out? How might analysts have power and influence? What is it that analysts do? What is it that analysts have? How is it that analysts act that might lead to analysts having influence in the domains that they operate in? So I'll stop sharing, and if I could get people to pop their hands up and offer me contributions on that question. So sources of power and influence that analysts might have. There's no right, wrong. I just want, in principle, thoughts. Kerry.
I always feel that I'm a bit of a big brother. So I feel as if we've got a lot of answers in our hands, but a lot of the problems is that people think they've got the answers as well. And so is that dealing with that conflict is I find really difficult and challenging.
And in your analogy of Big Brother, do you mean as a sibling or do you mean as in Orwell?
Oh, I've got access to lots of data across the organisation. I can see lots of things, and I can find those needles in a haystack that people don't realise are there. So in terms of, I've got like an overview of the whole organisation, I feel sometimes.
Okay, so one of the sources of influence that you might then have in that situation is the sort of breadth of view and access to data and knowledge and information that may offer perspectives on across that breadth. That's right?
Yeah, that's where I'm.
That's great. Mohammed?
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Okay. Thank you so much for letting me to speak. Actually, the thing about I believe the analytics is like prediction.
Prediction, did you say?
Exactly. The predictive in the future. So analytics is once again. I don't know why it's like.
Yeah, it's really echoing. Actually, maybe put yourself on mute, but I think I get your point. So it's predictive in the sense, so there's some sense in which you're a modern day soothsayer. Then there's some power and influence that you may have because of an ability to predict. Peter.
Yep. So we have to predict the future in the name of the data. So it should be very useful for us to understand the future.
That's great. Thank you, Mohammed. I'll just mute you because you're very echoey on there. Peter.
I was just going to offer that we produce things that people rely on. I don't know if that's a source of kind of leverage.
Say more. And what do you mean by that? Just elaborate that for me.
Well, data analysis is engineering. We have data pipelines, and we produce infrastructure that solves real-world issues, automates real-world things, and people can come to rely on that. So,
that's great.
Yeah, I feel people rely on our work, and they need to be able to respond to if we have obstacles to those endpoints, then they need to play ball with us in order for us to get there.
Oh, that's great. So that sense of the people making decisions may have some reliance on the products that you're producing as an analyst. Ali, is it? Yes, Ali.
Hello. I think that sort of going on that point, we have the power to influence decisions in the organization by using data to drive those decisions.
Okay, so there's some way in which analysis is framing the world of the decision maker, is providing some influence into the choices that they make by constraining and enabling certain things given the results of analysis.
Yeah, if we provide them with narrative and do sort of deep dive explorations, yeah.
Excellent. We'll come to narrative shortly. Kerry, I'll give you a second bite of the apple and then we'll move on.
Sorry, something just came to my mind as we were talking. We've got the power to change perceptions.
Okay, say more.
So in terms of, I often talk to people and think, oh, I thought that was happening, but now you're showing me something different, and it's changing those sort of historic sort of thinking and showing them new things. And then it changes the way that they look at their decision making then as well. So it's influencing their decisions as well based on the insights that I'm giving them.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I sent someone a piece of analysis that a colleague had done earlier on today, and I said this analysis completely changed the way I thought about the apparent trade-off between continuity and access in primary care. It completely changed the way I thought about it, and it was a piece of analytical work that gave me a new way of seeing things. So I can understand what you're saying from that perspective. So let me push on. I'm going to offer you a few sources of power that I think analysts have, and then I'm going to ask you for your responses to these. The sources of power and influence I'm going to offer you come from a piece of work by French and Raven. I think it's 50s or 60s, so it's, you know, it's sort of fairly well-trodden stuff. And they give us 6 sources of power that you might observe in a workplace. And in fact, you might observe them more generally than just the workplace, you'll see. But I think a subset of them apply particularly well to analysts. So I'll go through all 6 in turn. The first source that French and Raven point to is authority that comes from a role or a position. So because someone is, you know, the prime minister or you know, for now, or the monarch, or, you know, the head of a team or a director of something, they have authority and influence that follows from that role or power. They see sources of power that follow from the ability to give and withhold reward. So that if someone, for example, is the director of a team, they may be able, they hold the power of patronage in a sense. They can promote people or not promote people. They can give money for projects or programs or withhold it. But they have the ability to value or to give or to withhold reward and to achieve influence in that sort of way. They point to the power of coercion. So in some, again, in some places, if you thought about the role of a director of a team, they could also impose penalties. In the extreme, they could be firing people, but they could certainly be getting people to do things that they don't like. They could be issuing sort of constraints and penalties in that sort of way. So 3 sources of power there: legitimate power, reward power, and coercive power. These might not be resonating at the moment, but I think perhaps as we come to the second 3, you'll start to see it a little bit more from the analyst perspective. Because the 4th source of power that French and Raven point to is expert power. So power that comes from expertise. So I think when Mohammed was talking about the ability to use analysis to predict the future, that is power and influence, it would seem to me, very firmly grounded in expertise, in knowledge and skills. Possibly that's also, Kerry, what you were pointing to with your first example. The next source of power that French and Raven point to is referent power. So this is power and influence that comes because people trust or respect, or even again, perhaps in the extreme, admire people who've got certain ways of going about things, certain characteristics. This is very often perhaps true for the analyst in terms of the way that they would go about things and the respect that they have to have for method and technique. Often people would see that as being trustworthy or being particularly straight, perhaps. And then the next source of power, which I think definitely is the first one that Kerry was pointing to, and I think also Ali and also Peter, is this sort of informational power. So power that comes because you have access to and or control of information that other people need. It provides you with a source of influence and a source of power. So just to round that out then, I think these are sort of 6 sources of power that hopefully you can recognize to some extent. I think you can categorize them very broadly, and perhaps as I've been going through that you've seen the way that I would think about this, in that really crudely, the top 3 sources of power, I think, follow from rank. So the top 3 sources of power, it seems to me that they operate via hierarchy. They operate because someone is a certain position in a certain institution with a certain set of powers, and, you know, legally or through custom and practice or through, you know, just the operation of hierarchy within an organization, they have those 3 sources of power. It's difficult to wield those 3 sources of power from below. Whereas the second 3 sources of power that I pointed to, it seems to me stem more from technique. It stems more from someone who is a technical expert. They've understood particular methods, particular approaches, particular skills that we know are technically valuable, and that we therefore treat as influential and powerful within the workplace. And it seems to me that's so much more obviously the case for analysts than the first 3 sources of power. So I'd like to move on and again to just get you to reflect and to offer your thoughts back to me. Having heard that, having had my contribution to this, what do you think this means for the skills and attributes of an analytical leader? If we were to take what I've just said and what you contributed earlier and say, okay, if we really push this on in terms of skills and attributes you would want to develop as a leader who is also an analyst, what are they? What does that mean? And also, and I'll keep returning to this question, how might we nurture those skills and attributes? What should we be doing in order to encourage those skills and attributes amongst our analysts? So I'll stop sharing there and just ask you for your contributions on those questions. I'm not monitoring the chat as well, so if you want to contribute, it's good old hands up. Mohammed, is that what they call a legacy hand, or is that a fresh one? I'll take it as legacy. What do we think this means? If we're trying to develop analysts as leaders, what do we think those sources of power might mean? Even on the face of it, what sort of things should we be encouraging and trying to develop? Louise?
Things like training, so that we're learning those skills and techniques in the right way, so that when we apply them, we know they're right.
There's something in that which is both about technique, as in like you've got to know it's right technically, haven't you? And there's something, it seems to me, that follows from that is also about psychology. So as an analyst, you know you can stand on what you're saying, and so therefore feel appropriately confident in it, because you know the technical grounding it has. In a sense, it's not just empty talk. It's like no, we know this because. Is that what you're pointing to?
Definitely, yes. Yeah, you're confident in the way that we've done it, and yeah, they can try and challenge it then.
Yeah, that's great. But the grounds upon which they would be challenging it are technical grounds. It's the debate is about technique, and in the sort of in the questions or comments that people put through before the session, someone pointed to imposter syndrome as something they would, I think, ideally like to get over. In some sense, I would say imposter syndrome is something to have something of. Definitely it is. I don't trust people who've got none of that. And it seems to me the way over it as an analyst is to know your technical onions. And that would be something that confidence could follow from. Joe, I can see a nice picture of you with a cat.
Oh, I don't think I was next, Fraser. I think Michael was before me.
I have you as a
Sorry.
monitor. Oh yeah, Michael. Sorry, Mike. You see how innumerate I am. I can't actually count between 1 and 2. Michael.
I mean, I was just thinking about standardization. We have a big problem. Well, not a very big problem, but we have a situation in our trust where we have potentially different. We have people from completely different management hierarchies reporting similar things, and quite often they don't match initially. So then there's an issue of, well, who's right and who's wrong, and it's all about making sure we have standard and we have high data quality and we understand what the pitfalls are. So yeah, that was what popped into my head.
That's really interesting. My understanding of what you've just said is, in a sense, there are sorts of managerial debates going on, and at least in part they hinge on analytical answers. So the way that gets arbitrated is by the technical expert, because how else do you arbitrate? You have to go to the source of that. And in order to do that, you're hunting the technical expert. And I guess to continue that, what you're saying then is the source of power and influence comes because you are the reference in that case. You are the people they come to say, help me, which is right. Is that right?
Yes. But there may be two people that are approached independently, and one may be right and one may be wrong, or they both may be wrong. I mean, it just kind of adds a layer of complexity to everything.
Again,
you've got multiple experts. Yeah,
multiple experts. Interesting though, what Louise was pointing to is the nature of that debate though is technical. It's a method-based debate. It's not a hierarchy-based debate. If you're going to figure out who's right and wrong in that sense, it's a question of method and technique. It's not a question of hierarchy. Joe, now you're now 1 on this, so I'm hoping my numeracy is not collapsed to the extent I can't get that right.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we've all got the excuse of the heat today. I was thinking though, resilience is a really important one. I think many of us on the call, some of us will have visible, some of us have invisible characteristics that get judged by people who are above us. A personal one for me, and other women that I know in data have been told that we will not progress because we are single mothers. And to have the resilience to just keep going when you know that people's opinions of you do not match your abilities, and be able to stand your ground and prove others wrong to progress, I think takes a certain amount of resilience.
Wow. I mean, no one's taking HR or legal advice from me. And yeah, it seems to me that the world I want to live in at least thinks it should either be illegal or at least very close to it to say to someone, you're not going to progress because you're a single mum. I mean, that feels to me to be obscene, if it's definitely and probably also illegal. I wonder what you think. I think the word resilience can be both extremely useful, and it's something I try to encourage in people that I love. I mean, I have teenage daughters, that resilience is something I think that they need. But also in the workplace, I think it can be weaponized, because what you then end up saying to individuals is you need to be resilient. And what that can often mean is you need to cope with unreasonable demands. So I also think this, I don't know, there's something sort of slightly sniffy about that word.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to put it better. I think there probably is a better word for how to not let other people's perceptions override what you actually want for yourself and for others around you, because you can take that learning of what you've gone through and apply it to be the type of leader that you want to be, and support others too. So yeah, there's a lot that you can do with that. It's not a negative thing necessarily.
No, I hope you don't think I was trying to portray it as I really wasn't.
Oh, no.
There's something I think extremely deep in what you're saying, which is that the act of leadership, sort of definitely does have bits of technique in. I wouldn't pretend that it doesn't, but it definitely has lots of character and self in it. So the way that people lead is of course very personal to them. The way that they have influences, of course, because of who they are and what they bring. And so it is a sort of full contact sport from that perspective. And so you're drawing on the reservoir of your experience whilst you're doing it, unavoidably so. So maybe what you're pointing to is life experience that gives you certain abilities. So that seems excellent to me. And then Kerry.
I feel like I'm gonna come across as a complete control freak now, because I'm gonna admit something that what I've learned, a mistake I've done in the past that I've learned a lot from. We had a new piece of data. I thought, oh, I can do something with this. So I did a little pilot and then sent it out to people and said, what do you think of this? Because they're so keen to get insights and data, they thought it was a finished product, and it was nowhere near that. I ended up having to work overtime, not get paid for it, obviously, late at night, just to get something solid so that it could be released out. And in terms of the control bit, it's controlling my own resource, controlling my time. So I keep things from people in a way until they're more ready now, which sounds bad, but it's the only analyst. There's not that many analysts around the resource. I haven't got a big team I can rely on, and I'm very much sort of like I work in a nursing team, and I'm the only analyst for that team. So I think there's a lot to be said about controlling your own resource, your own energy, your own time as well. And keeping that work-life balance, that's really difficult as well in terms of leading your work, to make sure that that's maintained.
It is, because you're not leading well if you're fried. No one is, because no one's their best self when they're completely fried. I want to move on, but there's two things you've pointed to that I just want to sort of drop in. The first is a very, very wise colleague of mine once said it's very, very useful to work out loud. For the people around you, it's very useful to work out loud. So to the extent you can work out loud and be sharing drafts, maybe not, all over, it is actually very useful for people around you to see what you're doing, to learn from. because they learn your process and how you think, and that's very useful. The other thing you've pointed to, I think, is the sort of control, the arbitration of quality, the technical arbitration of what is good enough to go out, what is final. That also seems to me to be a source of power and influence. So thank you very much. I just want to move us on then. There's a couple of things I want to just offer you, and I'll move us on to our next topic. In terms of offering you sort of other things to explore, we used to have a whole festival on decision making a couple of years ago, and one of the sessions that we ran had got Alistair McClellan from the HSJ and Sir David Nicholson, who was the ex-chief exec of the NHS. And they did a session on how does decision making actually work in the NHS, and it's it's really quite good. Very, very early on, though, Alistair McClellan asks David Nicholson to explain an analogy that he uses to talk about how power works in the NHS, and it's the analogy between knights and barons. And maybe we don't like some of the gendered language in there, but the point he's making, and it's really worth watching, is this point about some people have power because of their position and because of their authority, the barons in the way Nicholson's describing it, but other people, and he uses the example of clinicians and medical directors, have power and influence because of technique, because of particular things that they know that other people don't know. And he uses clinicians, but I think you could insert analysts in there. So I'm just pointing you towards that. When you get the slide, you'll see the link. Anyway, so when we run the leadership program for analysts, we tend to do quite a bit of work on this, getting people to really delve into it. And I've of course skated you across it really quite quickly, but hopefully you get a sense of where we would come from on that. One other thing, it came through in the comments you guys provided ahead of the session, and we very typically get asked to do this for analysts, is to help them tell the story, help them make analytical results as compelling as they possibly can be. So I'm going to just show you one of the ways that we offer to just help stimulate people think about how they do that. And I'll just present it through for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour or so, and then again ask for your reflections on what I've offered you. And the situation we give people is this: we ask them to imagine that they've done the analytical work and they've got some results. And sometimes we'll give them a scenario. Imagine you're now off to the committee and you've got 15 minutes to present. How are you going to tell this story? How are you going to structure the presentation of your analysis? So maybe you can be reflecting on that. How would you usually go about it? What I'm going to offer you is 7 ways I can think of. And so it doesn't mean, these are 7 ways that have been neatly categorized in the universe. These are my observations of the way that people typically structure the presentation of analytical material. I'll go through each one in turn. But briefly, they are the drunken cowboy, the scientist, the tour guide, the fixer, the director, the weaver, and then finally improv. And what I'll do is I'll go through each one and say a little bit about what I think it is, and a little bit about its sort of structure and something about its underpinning logic. As I'm going through it, think which one best categorizes your average presentation, or the average way in which you would help people see your results. And maybe also think if there are some that you're drawn to but don't quite use. Is there a sort of adjacent one that you think, oh, actually maybe that would be quite a good one to develop into? So I'll go through each one in turn. The first, you will also tell probably from my tone of voice or the way I lay this out, there are some that I think are more worthy than others. And the first one, you can tell by the title, I don't think it's worthy. It's the drunken cowboy. The narrative structure of this kind of presentation, and I'm thinking here mainly about verbal presentations, goes something like fact, 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 fact. And I swear this isn't a straw man. I've seen this presentation given several million times, and so will you. The underpinning logic of this, I think, is actually probably sound. The underpinning logic is that analysis produces facts. I've produced some facts. Here are the facts. And in a sense, the reason why I'm sort of slightly sneering about this thing is it requires the audience to do all of the work. What the analyst is saying is that my job is to produce facts. You lot have the job of working all of this out. So I think it's discourteous. I also think it doesn't help the power and the influence of the analyst. So I think there's work to be done, there. That's the drunken cowboy. The second one, I think, is the most common, probably the most common, and I would characterize it as the scientist. The narrative structure of this kind of presentation is I had some questions, I applied some methods, I have some results, and that's the general structure of it. The underpinning logic of the scientist, I also think, is completely sound, and in many ways I've been pointing to this throughout the session so far. The underpinning logic is that analysts are technical specialists, and that their technique is grounded in the scientific method to a greater or lesser extent, but in a sense draws from the well of science. And what that means is that when you're trying to answer questions, you go at questions using methods. And, applying those methods is going to give you some results that can be supported by a certain set of methods. So because of that logic, you end up with the questions, methods, results structure to presentations. And I think it's sound. There's nothing at all wrong with that. It's perhaps limited, but there's nothing at all wrong with it. The third one I would point to is the tour guide. This is sort of not, I wouldn't say this is particularly common, but the narrative structure that you hear with this is, in the presentation, I set out on a journey to investigate these questions or this topic. I did this and I found that. I did this and then I found that. And then I took a different route with it and then we found these things. And then I reversed back on myself and then we went down another avenue and I found the following things. And the narrative structure then is a sort of first person chronology. It's what I did over time. And the underpinning logic of this is quite interesting. It's that analysis is a process of discovery. And the process of discovery has a beginning where people ask questions or give you a topic. You then get a journey where you're doing things and you're uncovering things. And then, of course, it's sort of never ending. So where are we going next with this journey? So that's the tour guide. That can be quite compelling because in a sense you find yourself in the audience following the person. You end up engaged with their story sometimes. The next one I would point to, I think, is a sort of classic management consultant structure. I'd refer to it as the fixer. And the basic structure is there was a situation and then there was a problem. Here are a set of solutions and here's the resolution of it. So things were going along as usual. Something went wrong. We've had a problem, and having looked at it, we think you should do X. Can you see it's the sort of classic, management consultant type structured things? And again, I'm not scoffing at this. I think that's a useful structure. The underpinning logic of this again is sound, which is that analysis has got a set of techniques within it that can be used to get purchase on managerial problems. And so applying analysis to managerial problems gives us solutions. And again, I think that underpinning logic is probably sound. The next two, I think, are sort of slightly more interesting from my perspective. They're sort of slightly more imaginative and perhaps a little bit more difficult to pull off or require a bit more thought. The first is the director. And the narrative structure you get when someone is employing this structure is that there's many, many different ways of looking at a problem or looking at a scene or looking at a question. And you can zoom right in and get involved with very specific details of it. And you can zoom right out again and get a sort of bigger picture perspective on things. So that's why I see it as being like a director. You're zooming in and out of the same scene. The underpinning logic of this is quite subtle, I think, and it's that you can present anything at different levels of abstraction. So you could be presenting this meeting here at the molecular level, what's going on at some sort of subatomic level within us. And also you could zoom right out and say, what is the analytical profession? What role does it play in policy or services? And both of those levels are true. Both of those are good, and probably one's more useful than the other, but you're zooming in and out. In a presentation for something like health and care, you can use specific to illustrate general. So specific case studies to illustrate general trends, and also vice versa, general trend then illuminated by a specific case. So that I would think of as the director. The next one I would think of as the weaver. The narrative structure to this way of telling the story is that there are many strands to a topic. So think of a topic, there will definitely be different strands within it. And the narrative structure here is one strand of this topic looks like this. Another strand looks like that. Another strand looks like this. And then at the end, if we combine these different strands, then we have. So in a sense, it's a thematic structure. The logic of this is, of course, that in any complex problem, in any sufficiently complex arena, there will be many factors and many themes in play. This structure allows you to have a proper look at each one, and then at the end to conclude by combining them and to see what it gives you, see what patterns seem to hold. So I think the director and the weaver, I always feel like they're two that are probably underplayed, are slightly harder to pull off, require some care, but I think can be extremely effective. And then the final one, I think you can only use it if you are a master, basically. If you are completely on top of your subject, if you're at like Yoda levels of technical prowess, and also some sort of, Yoda-like level of calm as well, I would refer to this as improv. And in a sense, what you're then doing as the analyst is, you walk on, clear your throat, and then say to people, what is it you want me to tell you about? And you just allow the audience to define the structure of everything, the level at which you explore things, the depth at which you explore things through questioning. And you, in a sense, you rely on interplay with people who want to know about what it is that you've done. It's pretty high wire, but it can be extremely effective. The underpinning logic is almost the reverse of the drunken cowboy, it seems to me. The underpinning logic is that here I am, the analyst, I'm here to serve you. And, you, the audience, typically decision makers, whatever else it is, you know what you want to know, and go ahead, ask. Here I am to serve. I will tell you I will tell you what I found, I will tell you where, but you are going to decide how and where the action takes place in the presentation. So it's brave, you can see it's brave. So there's the 7 ways I can think of then: the drunken cowboy, scientist, tour guide, fixer, director, weaver, and improv. I'm interested in your reflections then. What do you make of what I've just offered you? Do you use any of these, do you think? And are there any that you think, oh, actually, do you know what? Well, maybe I should have a crack at that in the next one that I do. Or do you know what? I'm literally never going to do that. So again, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm very interested in your reflections on those different ways of telling the story. I'll go for my now well-trodden technique of asking for hands. Beverly.
Hi, yeah, just reflecting on the drunken cowboy, I think is something I did quite early on in my career. I think I'm much more of a tour guide now, because often I like to talk. I can chatter, a bit like a tour guide. But sometimes our audience needs a lot of reassurance of what our approach has been and how we arrived at figure. And probably might go back to what Michael said about when you have differing versions of the truth, it's easy to feel a bit defensive about your approach, because obviously you want to be accurate, you want people to trust you. So I think that's where my head goes. I think early on, before I truly understood what an analyst was, and I'm not sure I still completely know, drunken cowboy was definitely, I think, what it was like, well, you present the facts.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think there is pressure for analysts just to do that. You just give us the numbers, you give us the data, you don't tell the story. And I know you are talking more about presentation specific, but I find that there's 90% of what I do is about move team reports that have numbers, that have that are black and white. They're numbers basically.
Yeah.
And then you get given a project that is where you can build the narrative, you can control where the data goes to tell the story, and that's so enjoyable. That's so much more enjoyable than the routine reports. So even to be any of those types of presenters, it feels like, and I don't know if it's just me, but we don't often have the opportunity. I don't often have the opportunity to be able to tell a whole story and be able to control the data, the questions, yeah.
Thanks, Beverly. That's really helpful. Thanks for your reflections. I can see why early career you would tend towards the drunken cowboy, almost out of nervousness, I think. I'm sure
Yeah.
I've done it out of nervousness.
Absolutely.
And there's something about, what upsides does, I'm talking now to myself and not to you, what upsides do grey hair and wrinkles bring? It's got to be some degree of comfort with not knowing things and some sense of, okay, well, this has now happened 1,000 times and no one's died, so I'll tell it now in a particular way. I realized when we were doing this work, when we were doing the leadership program, that my model of an analyst was the one that I spend my time with in the strategy unit, who tend to do bespoke work with questions. So some of what I've said might not apply because of that. There's something that you're pointing to that I think is extremely important, though. We can't live in a world of unstructured fact because it would be incoherent. It would make no sense whatsoever. We couldn't operate. It would be too bizarre. In every respect, it would be weird. So an analyst is even in the apparent thing where they're just providing a pack of things, they've excluded some things. Even the act of exclusion is an attempt to bring coherence in some respect. It might be not a very good one, but they're bringing it by not exposing the whole universe to the decision maker. So they're still doing it. They're still doing it. Michael.
So the improvisation one really kind of struck a chord with me, not because it's necessarily what we always do, but it's kind of where we're striving to get to, in the sense that you need to know a lot in order to be able to let the audience lead you, because you need to know what the audience is talking about. You've got to have the confidence to be able to respond. So you need to know that your data is correct. And then you have to, well, we try to give people access to summarized and patient level data and dashboards so that they can kind of find, so that they can lead themselves. But then we obviously have to also be able to lead in order to teach people how to use things, but also to solve problems. So it's nice when you can let the audience lead you, but then also demonstrate how they can resolve their own problems. And that's not something that I could do initially when I started, because I didn't have the sort of corporate knowledge as well as the technical knowledge. But it's a nice place to be if you can get there.
It is. I think there's something extremely important in what you're pointing to there, which is this is doable over time. I think you can do. It's a highly relational way of telling the story that basically trades on history, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
And relation, because it means that if I'm going to appear in front of you and say, what do you want to know? I have to trust that you don't think it's your job to shoot me. I have to trust that you think it's your job to sincerely inquire of me and that I can help you. Now, not every place is like that, and not all relationships are like that. So I've also got to say there's something else going on in that method. Vahid.
So I think from my personal experience, and I've learned that I need to mix all the facts, for example, with improvs and all those, because I think one is not necessarily a solution I have found in my experience to be the answer to many. And it's the combination, and it's the art. What I've learned is the art of reading your audience is what I'm trying to become better at, because I've learned that as an analyst, we have to be able to read your audience and kind of understand their need, because half the time you'll find 80% of the time their needs, they don't know what they need. So it's a matter of reading the audience And this is what I've learned. And for me, I've learned mixing all those areas that you've shown. I found it for me personally to be a lot more peaceful, because you find that you get less rejections, for example, and you get more people on your side, because at the end of the day, whatever story we're telling, we're trying to tell somebody else's story, because it's their department, it's their way of working. It's not necessarily mine, because I've never worked in that department. Only what the general manager, for example, have told me what they do and what they want to see. Not often what they want to see is what they get, but it's one of those, and the data is data. But that's what I've learned in my experience, is being able to mix all the combinations, because you still need facts, but you need to be able to, uh, influence a story to, at the end of the day, all our work. I personally have reached a level that I would like to produce data set that people are actually using and acting on, rather than a display. I think I've learned that I used to do a lot of display purposes, and it has no value because you put so much time. This is how I do now.
I suspect that's right, and you certainly wouldn't be alone in this profession if it was the thing you're pointing to. I often, when I'm coaching people in writing, I will say, but this is also definitely true of presentations, is that what you're doing first and foremost is an imaginative act. You have to imagine that you're in the audience, or if you're writing, that you are writing to someone who you can picture vividly. And you then are writing to them in a courteous way. You're giving them the facts, but you're giving them it in digestible form, in some logical order, well set, all of those sorts of things. So you're right. I can't imagine there's one structure that rules them all, but different structures will suit different audiences according to your reading of them. So I think that's spot on. Kerry.
This is very much along the same lines as Michael, where the improv roles sort of rang a bell, or sort of made me think more around. I didn't really have a way of describing it, but now I've got a word for it, which is great. It's something that we're trialing out now, and I've been trialing a few workshops, because I think a lot of work with data is collaboration between myself and the clinicians, because they bring a lot to the analysis, as well as I can bring the technical side to it, in terms of we're both subject matter experts in the same thing, but both bring different things to the table. So I haven't sort of worked out how to, I haven't got there yet, but that's what I'm aiming for, is that improv session where they are also bringing and asking questions of the data and sort of guiding it, and we're both guiding it together and steering it together. I think that's where we're trying to get to.
I like that. The in this session about in the sense about communicating or telling the story, I will also sometimes do work on metaphor and analogy as communication devices, because I think if you're trying to metaphor means to bridge between, so it does its own job. And if you're trying to bridge between different technical domains, which you're describing, analysis and clinical work, sometimes you have to talk in metaphor and analogy in order for that communication task to work. The analogy you gave me, actually, when you were talking about it then, was the analogy of shared decision making in a clinical setting. So I, the patient, come to you, the clinician. You know things I don't know. I know things you don't know. The best decision has to combine those things. It can't be your imposition or my imposition. It has to combine those two things. So it seems to me that what you're talking about, what you're pointing to, it feels like shared decision making, actually. And I'm probably a clinician clock. Thanks everyone. Let me just move on. I've got the final sort of little thing I want to just offer, which I'm just really interested in what you think of it. I'm not entirely settled myself on this. So if that's a sort of little look at telling the story, I also think there's a way of understanding certain kinds of analysts or certain ways of using analysis, where really what you're doing is being the story. And you are now going to have all of your own heroes and heroines that will come to mind. with not much thought, here were people that I thought, actually, no, do you know what? You've had a staggering influence on the way I've seen certain things. You know, so you know, here are my heroes. So Sally Gainsbury at Nuffield Trust has completely changed the way I've thought about a lot of things. I've had the joy of working with Muir Gray on occasion for, you know, reasonably prolonged bits sometimes. Again, completely changed the way, and maybe we don't think of Muir as an analyst, but certainly some of what he was influencing me with, I would think of as being analytically grounded. Jess Morley, of course, anyone who's even vaguely interested in data and digital would perhaps see her having influence, and Siva, particularly when it comes to the politics of health and care and bringing analytics and analysis to bear in that world. I just think has a tremendous voice. And so here are some heroes and heroines I have in this world, and they have influence in a way that is entirely without position. I can ignore any one of them and my life would go on, you know, unaffected, less rich. But they're having influence in a particular way. And that way, it seems to me, is by being the story as an analyst. And I think that's, you know, rare and exalted and difficult and all the rest of it. But I do just think that's true. So I just wanted to sort of offer that. The final thing I just wanted to give for, you know, maybe the next 5 minutes of conversation is this summary. In our leadership work, we're quite often asked to distinguish